Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse weren't just hikers. They were experienced hikers, trusted the land, knew the signs, carried bear spray, hung their food, followed every rule. They weren't careless. They were careful. But on the night of October 1st, 2023, somewhere deep in the Red Deer River Valley, under the cold breath of Banff's dark sky, something went horribly wrong. An urgent message crackled from their satellite device. Just 3 chilling words. Bear attack bad. By the time help arrived, it was too late. This is the story of Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse, their final camp, and the grizzly that came in the night. Welcome to the Animal Quest channel. If you find stories like this important, haunting, and worth telling, please consider subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it. It helps us bring you more real, unforgettable moments from the wild. Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse weren't just hikers. They were devoted partners, scientists, environmental stewards, people who respected nature deeply and knew how to live alongside it. From their home in Lethbridge, Alberta, the mountains had always called to them. They didn't see the wilderness as a place to escape to. They saw it as a place to return to, a part of who they were. Together, they had spent decades exploring Canada's most remote backcountry trails. Glacier-fed valleys, alpine meadows, snow-lined ridges. This wasn't a once-a-year trip for them. It was a way of life. Friends described them as thoughtful, grounded, the kind of couple who didn't take risks, who never cut corners. Doug worked as a technician in an agricultural research lab. Jenny, too, was deeply involved in science. Both believed in the power of conservation, and they passed that belief to others. And always by their side was Tris, their beloved border collie, a gentle, loyal dog with boundless energy and a calm presence in the wild. She had been on countless adventures with them, always close by, always trusted. In late September 2023, Doug and Jenny prepared for what should have been another peaceful trek. This time, a week-long hike deep into the Red Deer River Valley in the northeastern section of Banff National Park. They packed their gear with care. Food was measured and sealed. A satellite communicator was charged and tested. Their bear spray checked, holstered. Every detail of their trip was planned with the kind of precision only decades of experience can bring. This wasn't a risky, thrill-seeking expedition. It was quiet, solitary, meant to be one more shared memory carved gently into the forest. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that something else was moving in the same valley. Something hungry, unpredictable, a predator driven by instinct, not reason. Because by the end of that week, all 3 of them would be gone. They were the kind of hikers who taught others how to survive in the wild. Until that weekend. On the morning of September 29th, 2023, Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse stepped into the heart of Banff's northeast backcountry, an untouched stretch of wilderness called the Red Deer River Valley. With Tris trotting eagerly beside them, they crossed into a world of silence, solitude, and raw nature. There were no towns here, no roads, no cell towers. Just wind through the spruce trees and the occasional rustle of something unseen. This trail wasn't for casual hikers. It cut through thick forest, over dry stream beds and rocky slopes, through country known more to wolves, elk, and bears than to people. But Doug and Jenny had walked this kind of ground before. It was what they loved. They knew what to expect, or so they thought. Their route was carefully mapped, a circular, week-long hike deep into the valley, far from any ranger station or well-traveled path. They planned to pitch their tent in designated areas, hang their food with precision, and move quietly through the wild, leaving no trace. For the first few days, everything went perfectly. The skies stayed clear. The nights were cold but calm. In the daylight, they moved through rolling alpine meadows and dark thickets of pine. They paused often, not because they were tired, but because they wanted to take it all in. The golden blaze of larches in early fall, the distant cry of a loon, the ripple of a stream that hadn't seen a human footprint in months. At night, they set camp carefully. No signs of trouble, no bear prints, no warning calls. Tris curled up just outside the tent, as she always did, alert, loyal, content. But the Red Deer River Valley is known for more than its beauty. It is one of the most remote stretches in Banff National Park. Rangers describe it as a place where nature makes the rules, and where sometimes those rules change. Unseen somewhere in the undergrowth, a grizzly moved. Perhaps it had caught their scent. Perhaps it had passed by once before, unnoticed. Or maybe it was already watching. The wilderness doesn't issue warnings, and Doug and Jenny were already 2 days into a path they wouldn't return from. But in Banff, the peace is only surface deep. What feels still and serene can shift in a moment. And in the autumn months, that shift often begins with a quiet whisper of movement, too soft for most to notice, until it's already too late. By the time Doug and Jenny entered the Red Deer River Valley, Parks Canada had already been monitoring unusual bear activity. It was late September, and the backcountry was entering what wildlife experts call hyperphagia, the seasonal frenzy where bears, driven by instinct, gorge themselves in preparation for hibernation. Food becomes obsession, boundaries blur, even seasoned grizzlies become unpredictable. In the weeks before their hike, notices were posted. Rangers urged caution. Multiple warnings were issued for the Banff backcountry, especially in remote areas like the Red Deer Zone. There had been recent reports of bear encounters, non-fatal but tense. No attacks, not yet. And still, Doug and Jenny did what they always did, followed the rules to the letter. They carried bear spray, one each. They kept it holstered at their sides, safety pins removed at night. Their food was strung high, suspended away from the tent using dry line and pulleys. Cooking was done well away from their sleeping site. No trace left behind. They didn't take shortcuts. They didn't ignore warnings. They respected the land and the creatures that lived in it. But respect doesn't stop a grizzly whose hunger drowns out fear. Campfires had been banned for the season. Too dry, too risky. And without that firelight, the nights were darker, still, cold. Somewhere beyond the thin fabric of their tent, something stirred. Maybe it had passed their trail days earlier. Maybe it followed them from a distance, catching the scent of dried food, or the dog. Maybe it didn't matter why it came, only that it was close now. Too close. A 25-year-old female grizzly, known to park officials but never marked as a threat, was roaming these woods. She had no cubs, no history of conflict, but she was large, strong, and something in her was changing. Doug and Jenny couldn't have known that the final night of their journey was already beginning. October 1st, 2023. The sun slipped behind the ridge in the Red Deer River Valley, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Temperatures dropped quickly. A dry, brittle chill crept into the trees. The kind of cold that bites just beneath your clothing and lingers behind every breath. Doug and Jenny set up camp in a designated backcountry area, routine for them. The tent went up with practiced efficiency. Food hung high, gear zipped up, bear spray within reach. Trysts, as always, remained close, watchful but relaxed. They were more than 20 kilometers from the nearest trailhead. No other hikers had been reported in the area. The nearest ranger station was hours away by helicopter. They were truly, completely alone. And the forest was silent. No wind, no owls, no coyotes in the distance. Just the kind of silence that makes you sit up straighter. The kind that presses in on all sides and dares you to notice it. They likely ate dinner before dark, quietly, simply. A final warm meal on the last night of their trek. There was nothing to suggest they felt uneasy. No frantic messages, no distress earlier in the day. Just calm. And then, nothing. Until 8:15 p.m. That's when the signal was sent. Somewhere in the cold dark of that October night, inside the fragile nylon walls of their tent, something went terribly wrong. And in the seconds that followed, Doug or Jenny or both managed to activate their Garmin InReach device and send an SOS. The message was short. It contained no coordinates, no names, no second try. Just 3 words. Bear attack bad. No punctuation, no time to explain. Just a final desperate signal flung into the void. By the time it reached the Parks Canada dispatch team, minutes had already passed. The clock had started ticking. But in that valley, miles from rescue under a moonless sky, that message was both a cry for help and a goodbye. That would be the last anyone heard from them. The SOS came in at 8:15 p.m. Parks Canada received it swiftly. It was flagged as high priority, an emergency message deep in Banff's northeast wilderness. And it wasn't just the content that raised alarms. It was the silence that followed. No follow-up, no movement on the tracker, no second message. Just nothing. But that night, October 1st, 2023, the weather over the Red Deer River Valley turned hostile. A system had rolled in, thick clouds, wind, and darkness that made air rescue impossible. Helicopters were grounded. Night operations in that terrain would only risk more lives, so they waited. Not by choice, but by force. Every second that passed weighed heavier. Overnight, rescue teams prepared, hoping, perhaps irrationally, that Doug and Jenny had survived, that maybe the bear had retreated, that they were huddled together, waiting for help to arrive. But dawn brought no relief, just a cold gray light spreading over the valley. At 5 a.m. October 2nd, a Parks Canada helicopter lifted off with a specialized response team on board. They reached the GPS coordinates marked in the original distress message. What they found was a scene that would stay with them forever. The tent had been flattened, crushed inward, the poles snapped. Scattered belongings told a story of chaos. Nearby, the bodies of Doug Inglis, Jenny Gusse, and Trish were discovered. There were no signs of hesitation, no chance to run. Their bear spray had been discharged. One of them had managed to use it, possibly both. The familiar orange mist still clung faintly to the air, a chemical haze that lingered even in the crisp morning wind. They had tried to fight. They had done everything they were supposed to do. But this bear was relentless. No paw prints were needed to tell what had happened. The damage was clear, fatal, violent. Doug and Jenny had faced their final moment together, in the place they loved most, facing a force of nature that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be stopped, and gave no warning. And the silence that had haunted the valley the night before was now complete. As rangers moved through the site that morning, October 2nd, 2023, the air was still, but heavy with something unseen. The attack had happened just hours earlier. Whatever had done this might still be close. They scanned the tree line, checked for movement, listened for the unmistakable sound of something massive pushing through the undergrowth. Then they saw her. Roughly 200 meters from the camp, partially concealed in the brush, a large grizzly sow, estimated at 25 years old, stood watching them. She didn't run. She didn't retreat. She stared. And then she approached. Rangers would later describe her behavior as highly unusual, confident, bold, and aggressive. She didn't show the normal signs of fear that most bears display when confronted by humans. Instead, she stood her ground and challenged theirs. There was no time to debate. Parks Canada made the call. The bear was euthanized on the spot. It was a swift, tragic end, but a necessary one. The risk of another attack was too great. This was not the behavior of a startled animal. This was something else. Later, after the body was removed and tested, the results only deepened the mystery. She had no cubs, no injuries, no history of prior incidents with humans. She wasn't starving, nor was she visibly sick. She was simply wild, powerful, and for reasons no one could fully explain, deadly. What happened in the Red Deer River Valley wasn't part of a pattern. It wasn't caused by human recklessness. There had been no mistake, no provocation. This wasn't a bear defending her young. This wasn't a bear driven to desperation. This was a rogue attack, and it shattered every expectation about what the wilderness was supposed to be. In the aftermath, the questions came hard and fast. How? Why? What went wrong? Because on paper, Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse had done everything right. They were experienced, equipped, cautious. They followed every protocol outlined by Parks Canada: food storage, campsite placement, and defensive preparation. They had bear spray, they used it. And yet, it wasn't enough. experts began to examine the one variable no hiker can control: the bear itself. In early fall, grizzlies across Banff National Park enter hyperphagia, a biological frenzy that drives them to eat almost non-stop in preparation for winter hibernation. Their hunger becomes overpowering, instincts sharpen, and their tolerance for anything unfamiliar begins to disappear. It's possible the bear was startled. Maybe it smelled the dog. Maybe it associated the tent with food. Maybe it simply decided to act first and question nothing. But even with all those possibilities laid out, one fact remained. This was Banff National Park's first fatal grizzly attack in over 40 years. And that shook people to the core. Because it wasn't just tragic, it was rare. In a park that sees hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, this kind of attack, unprovoked, fatal, and so sudden, was nearly unheard of. Was this an isolated incident? Or was it something more? Had decades of growing tourism pushed wildlife past a hidden tipping point? Had climate shifts or ecosystem disruptions changed grizzly behavior in subtle, dangerous ways? Or was it something worse? Something far more terrifying? That sometimes, despite all preparation, nature is simply unpredictable, and no one, not even the most experienced, can truly be safe. In the days that followed, as news of the tragedy spread beyond Banff, across Alberta, and eventually across the country, the shock was universal. Not just because Doug Inglis and Jenny Gusse had died, but because of who they were. They weren't thrill seekers. They weren't novices. They were protectors of the land, lovers of the wild. People who didn't just visit the backcountry, they belonged to it. Their family, broken by the loss, still found the strength to speak. In a brief, quiet statement, they said simply, they died doing what they loved. It was the kind of sentence that could fit on a stone. Simple, final, but filled with weight that words can't carry. At Parks Canada, protocols were reviewed, training manuals reopened, staff retrained. But when the final internal reports were completed, one message stood out above the rest. A hard truth that no ranger wanted to say, but none could ignore. Sometimes nature makes the rules, and that's what made this tragedy so difficult to process. There was no clear mistake, no obvious misstep, only a grim reminder that even the safest precautions can be swallowed whole by a single, unpredictable moment in the wild. Doug and Jenny were laid to rest in Lethbridge, the same place where they began their journey together decades earlier. But their story didn't end there. Their names are now spoken with reverence in the hiking community. Tributes poured in, not just from friends, but from strangers who had followed their photos, their hiking routes, their quiet devotion to wild spaces. In memory, they're frozen in those moments of joy, walking side by side through golden meadows, leaning over maps by the firelight, laughing as Triss bounds through the snow. Always together, and always surrounded by mountains. The message was short, 3 words, no punctuation, no time to explain. Just a desperate signal cast into the void of a dark wilderness. Bear attack bad. That was it, their final call, their last breath sent through satellites and mountains. Not a scream, not a goodbye, just a warning, bare, urgent, and irreversible. Because sometimes that's all the wild allows. No foreshadowing, no logic, just a moment. And then silence. And that message? It's more than just the end of a life. It's a reminder that even in paradise, danger lurks. That even the most experienced can fall. That even the best precautions are sometimes not enough. And that the wild, sometimes it doesn't give warnings twice. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe these real events deserve to be told, remembered, and learned from, then take a moment. Subscribe, share this video, leave a comment, because every story like Doug and Jenny's reminds us of something far bigger than ourselves. Thanks for watching.